Hi, I'm Dave Ross. I'm here with Mike Fanelli, the noted track and field historian and proprietor of his own track and field museum in his garage, a noted location. And today we're going to talk about his history with the Olympic trials. So, Mike, welcome. Your very first Olympic trials was 1980, if I'm correct. Tell us about that initial journey.
Oh, that was an extraordinary trials. I had followed the 72 and 76 trials, both which were staged here in Eugene, but I actually got to attend my first Olympic trials in 1980. I had press credentials with Running Times magazine. This would be that credential. You might not recognize this long-haired, bearded hippie freak.
And you were how old at the time?
I believe I was 24 years old. It was kind of cool because I came up, with the credential, but I also was with my team. We had founded the Greater San Francisco Track Club, and along with my older brother, who had competed in the marathon in those 1980 Olympic trials. In fact, he had led the first 18 miles of the.
This is your brother Gary,
My
correct?
brother Gary, yeah, he had led the. It was the Road to Moscow, and his T-shirt at the Olympic trials was "The Road to Moscow ends here," and he led for the first 18 miles to set them up in order to run faster than they did in Russia, and he succeeded in that. At any rate, we as a group stayed right up the street here, up by the basketball arena at Fraternity Row. We stayed in a fraternity house, and it was a really cool Olympic track and field trials. Even though we knew that we weren't going to compete in those games, the performances were extraordinary. Everything from Madeline Manning winning the 800 meters. That men's 10,000 meters was a fantastic race between Craig Virgin, who won, and Herb Lindsay, with Greg Fredericks getting third. So,
in 1980, they'd already made the announcement that this was that the boycott was happening. So this was the trials to nowhere, and a lot of guys still came out and still ran their best.
They did be, on the off chance that might get overturned. So that was the first Olympic trials that I ever had the privilege of attending. So this would make this particular Olympic trials would be my 11th consecutive Olympic trials.
So was that your first trip to Eugene in 1980?
No, my first trip to Eugene, I was on my way to Eugene. I was hitchhiking across the United States via Brigham Young University and the NC2A championships in 1975. On that trip, I arrived in Eugene with less than $20 and didn't know a soul other than just names that I had read in track and field news. I didn't have a roof over my head, so I busted the lock on the press box of the women's softball field adjacent to the basketball arena, and laid down my Boy Scout bedroll there, and had my first Eugene experience. And here we are, all these many years later. How many years later is that? 75, 25? Oh wow, that's 46 years ago.
Just a day or two.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what performance in that initial trials stands out to you as being the best?
I mentioned the Madeline Manning win of the 800, and I mentioned Craig Virgin taking that 10,000. But the Olympic moment for me, and I think for many, particularly Duck fans and Eugene locals, was the 5,000 meters. You might recall that Billy McChesney took off with about 4 laps to go, broke it open, the University of Oregon Duck, being chased by both Dick Berkeley and Matt Centrowitz, and that was the trio that made that particular Olympic team, and it was extraordinary. I have never heard Hayward Field louder before or since than once Billy McChesney took off in that 5,000 meters. It was electric.
Outstanding. And so then let's move on to 1984 in Los Angeles, where we have the Olympics in our home country. What's greater than that?
Yeah, well, the 1984 Olympics was pretty extraordinary. It was held at the Coliseum, which is the venue for the actual Olympic Games. So it was kind of a trial run for those Olympic Games in terms of facilities and that sort of a thing. Lots of extraordinary performances, but the one that stands out from that particular Olympic trials is what is arguably the greatest 800 meters ever run on American soil. If you YouTube that 1984 Olympic trials 800 meters, you will see a race for the ages. So
We've got some names like James Robinson and Don
Yeah,
Page.
right, exactly. Good knowledge. Yeah.
But then you come in and with these young guys, Johnny Gray, Johnny Marshall,
right?
yeah,
You know,
Earl Jones.
Earl Jones wins it, man.
Yeah.
Eastern Michigan. I mean, it's like, whoa, where did that come from? Awesome race. Yeah, just it, never before nor since. And now, you know, we go to those trials, 800 meters in 2008. That 800 was pretty extraordinary, but hard to top that one.
And if I'm not mistaken, the winning time was an American record
It was
at the
an
time.
American record, yeah. It was the deepest race ever held in the United States. So.
And then a very big upset that same year, Ruth Wysocki upsetting the heavily favored Mary Decker in the 1500.
Which was pretty cool because Ruth is a Southern California gal, right? You know, Citrus College and that sort of thing. And yeah, that was a big upset. Made the cover of Track and Field News. That was their
very
choice
iconic photo.
Iconic.
Yeah. And then on to 1988, the Trials for Seoul. What stands out to you from that race?
So the Seoul Olympic Trials, 1988, was held in Indianapolis, Indiana. Aside from monstrous thunderstorms nearly every afternoon, things that stood out for me from that particular meet, the women's 10,000 meters. It was the first ever women's 10,000 meters. The first women that would get to compete in the Olympic Games at that distance. Now, granted, in 1984, women got to run the marathon for the first time, but prior to that time, the longest distance for women was 3,000 meters. They added the 10,000, and it was a classic race. You know, it was Francie LaRue in there, and you had you had Lynn Jennings in there, and it was actually won, surprisingly, in an American record by my dear friend and the maid of honor in my wedding, Lynn Nelson. There you go. And
in less than favorable conditions, it sounds like.
Yeah, less than favorable conditions. And then you know, we all went off to Seoul, South Korea together. And my roomie was Lynn was my roomie, well, one of my roomies. And, yeah, so we had a really cool experience in Seoul. But yeah, that was the highlight for me personally in 1988. Yeah.
Then on to 92, the Barcelona Trials.
Yeah, well, that was a really cool Olympic trials. And what was so cool about that particular Olympic trials, it was held in New Orleans. And I don't think any of us had ever been to a big track meet in New Orleans. It was cool. It was the first time, oh my God. It was the first time that an Olympic trials had been, first time Olympic trials had been in New Orleans. It was the first time they served beer in an Olympic trials, okay? Right? You take cups of beer, that was great. The parties associated with it was great. The race that just stands out the most to me was probably the men's 1,500 meters. You know, with Spivey in there, and the great Georgetown runner Holman. It was a really exciting men's 1,500 meters. And on the
distance
Seoul.
races, obviously, the 5K and the 10K were obviously hindered by the heat and humidity as far as times and performances.
Yeah, and you know, you got to remember, in the 1990s, American distance running was not all that. You know, wasn't. You know, we've made a really nice recovery from that. Our sport has, but yeah, it was really kind of lackluster and that sort of thing. Those games were really a cool games too, by the way. I remember being in the stands day one of the Seoul Olympic Games, and with a number of other pundits, we were trying to determine exactly what Saeed Awida was going to run, because he had qualified in the 800 meters, the 5,000 meters, and the 10,000 and 1,500. He'd qualified everything from the 800 to the 10,000. I mean, come on, that was really cool, right? Being in that position. So that's memories of 92.
And then on to 96 in Atlanta, and you know, it's the same stadium where you're going to host the Olympics later that same year. Very cool event.
Yeah, hot, very, very hot. Those Olympic trials were, but the sprints were all the rage. I mean, you know, we were talking Michael Johnson and that sort of thing.
And his gold spikes.
And his gold spikes, and you know, you know, everything else was second to the story about Michael Johnson, and that was really, you know, really the highlight of the 1996 Olympic trials.
But some big names on the American side of the distances. You've got Bob Kennedy, Todd Williams, some really standout performances.
It was a good period.
And Kennedy went on to, with 800 meters to go in Atlanta, is leading the 5,000 meters. And I just remember the crowd going absolutely nuts. And didn't hang on to medal, but it was very cool to see. You know, it was a great resurgence for American distance running.
Yeah. Well, you know, we could go on to, you know, to the couple of Sacramento trials and the next trials and that sort of thing. But if you wouldn't mind, I was hoping we could roll on back, you know, in the Wayback Machine to the origin of the Olympic.
I see you brought some very cool memorabilia along with you. Let's talk
some
a little
items
bit about
from
that.
the garage. You know, everybody's got to have some things hanging out in their garage. So the Olympic track and field trials, the history of the Olympic track and field trials is we didn't actually have an Olympic track and field trials, an official Olympic track and field trials like we have today until 1920. Prior to that time, all the Olympic trials selections, that's what they were. They were site selections. And they had a meet on the east, the New England area, the Northeast. They'd have a meet in the Midwest, usually Chicago, and meet on the West Coast. And they would, the officials you know, that represented the United States Olympic Committee and AAU and that sort of thing would determine by a selection process. And it wasn't black and white. There was a little subjectivity to it. And that's the way they chose the Olympic team until 1920, which is when they had the very first Olympic trials. But also, prior to 1920, there was no limit to the number of athletes that a country could send to the Olympic Games. So, for instance, in 1912, the United States sent 11 men in the 100 meters, and 5 out of the 6 finalists were Americans in the 1912 Olympic Games. So when 1920 rolled around, and we had our very first ever Olympic track and field trials, they had adjusted that number so that only 4 per country could compete. Prior to that 1920, though, the regional meets were like this one right here. This is the meet program for the New England rendition, the Northeast United States, East Coast Olympic selection.
June 8th of 1912.
Yeah, so this was
Official
held.
program.
This was held at the Harvard Stadium, Harvard University. But then when we actually went to Olympic trials, that was 1920 was the first time they ever held, where, you know, all of the different regions came to one place at one time. And this is the Olympic track and field program from 1920, the first ever Olympic track and field trials.
Dated July 17th, 1920.
And you'll note that it was also at Harvard Stadium. And in fact, interestingly enough, I mean, we don't really think of Harvard Stadium as part of track and field history, but the 3 first Olympic trials.
So that's the first year where it became top 3 no matter what.
This was
do
top,
or
no,
die.
and no, this is 4, do or die. Yeah. And then the first 3 Olympic track and field trials, official Olympic track and field trials, 1920, 1924, and 1928, were all held at Harvard Stadium. Then thereafter, the 1936 Olympic Games, they were the ones held in Berlin. And that Olympic trials was held at Randall's Island in New York. And you may know Randall's Island, it's pretty well known, but it was the opening of Randall's Island. This is the meet program of the 1936 Olympic track and field trials.
July 11th and 12th, 1936.
And it was the grand opening of Randall's Island, and the way you get to Randall's Island is on the Triborough Bridge. So they did a simultaneous grand opening. It was the grand opening of the Triborough Bridge and Randall's Island. This is the Olympic trials that would take the team to compete in Berlin, and this is the Olympic trials where a 19-year-old high schooler named Louis Zamperini made the team in the 5,000 meters, and some guy from Ohio named Jesse something.
That
like
Owens guy?
Yeah, no, not Owens guy. Yeah,
Ah.
that's the significance.
And speaking of Zamperini, you may have seen the movie that was made about his life called Unbroken, which is very cool. Talks about his experiences in the war and then becoming an athlete.
Prisoner of War. Yeah.
Yeah. Outstanding film.
And then, of course, you had the war years, 40 and 44, where there were no Olympic Games, nor there were any Olympic trials. 1948 was the Olympic trials. They were held in Los Angeles. They were in preparation for the Games in London. In 1952, also in Los Angeles Coliseum. 1956, they moved they went back and forth. They would flip-flop back and forth for a couple of years between Los Angeles and Stanford University. 1964 was indeed at right here. You'll see that this was held at the Los Angeles Coliseum. 1964, you can't help but remember a guy named Lindgren, Jerry Lindgren. So that's this particular ticket, just in case you might need to get entry into those Olympic trials. As 1968, we went to the Echo Summit, 7,000 feet, to replicate the conditions at Mexico City. World records were set. Some were ratified, some weren't. A couple of world records that were set there included Vince Matthews in a tune-up meet there in the 400 meters, and then Lee Evans, and then John Carlos. All three of those world records never ratified.
But did they not have another pseudo trials in 1968 that it was not at altitude?
Yes, well, they had, and thanks for bringing that up. They weren't pseudo trials, they were called SOTs, semi-Olympic trials. And in 1968, they had determined that if you won your competition in Los Angeles, you'd be an automatic selection as long as you demonstrated fitness thereafter at Echo Summit. But then they rescinded that after the fact. And so there's guys like Dave Patrick, who won the 1,500 meters in the semi-Olympic trials, the SOTs in Los Angeles. And although he finished fourth at the Olympic track and field trials at Lake Tahoe and Echo Summit at 7,000 feet, he was not selected. They reneged on that promise. Yeah.
For those of you who may not know, they had this to replicate the altitude of Mexico City, and altitude is definitely a factor for distance races. It's there's less oxygen in the air. It's great for sprinters, but definitely a hindrance. NCAA uses altitude-adjusted performances. So, for example, if you're going to run 28 minutes at 5,000 feet of altitude, it's probably equivalent to 27:30 at sea level or something of that nature. It's a pretty big adjustment.
Yeah, and then once we went to those Olympic Games, we won the United States track and field team, maybe, arguably, the most extraordinary Olympic track and field team of all time. Some of us historians make an argument for 1956 versus 1968, but check it out. Being all set up with the high altitude training camp for quite a long period of time up in Echo Summit produced some amazing results, including gold medal at the Olympic Games in the 100 meters, the 200 meters, the 400 meters, bronze, Tommy Farrell, bronze medal, even though he's a sea level guy, in the 800 meters, bronze medal in the steeplechase, silver medal in the 1500 meters, that would be Jim Ryan versus Kip Keino, world records and wins in the pole vault, the discus, the shot put, the decathlon, right? The long jump. Oh yeah, there's the long jump, right? So amazing, So those trials are my second favorite Olympic track and field trials.
Outstanding. What do you think's your first? I mean, you've been to 11 different ones now. Which one's your favorite Olympic trials that you've been to?
Well, I think the coolest Olympic trials, other than 1968, is a year that I wasn't actually in attendance. Although I followed it as a little boy, young man, a young high schooler.
Here in Eugene?
This one right here, the 1972 United States Olympic Track and Field Trials. And did you know this is the first time? 1972 is the first time the Olympic trials were ever held in Eugene. We always think of Eugene as where the Olympic trials always are, but the first time they were here was 1972. Obviously, that was the Steve Prefontaine year, Steve versus George Young. All the way across the board. Dave Waddle tied the world record in the 800 meters at this meet.
There's pre-set an American record in beating George Young to win the 5,000 meters.
So that it was an extraordinary meet on so many levels. Our shot putters were great. Our ball putters. So it's a tough toss-up between 1968 and 1972, the greatest American Olympic track and field trials. In 1976, we revisited Eugene for the second time, and then again in 1980. So, and then we've spoken of the years thereafter. So,
Being sitting here in Tracktown as we speak, and Eugene has this fantastic reputation. How much of a difference do you think that is as far as like the crowd factor for the athletes, and knowing that these fans are knowledgeable and they love the sport so much more than anywhere else in the United States and maybe anywhere else in the world?
Sometimes Eugene, relative to the Olympic trials, gets knocked because of the pollen count, and some people that have that issue. You used to hear about it more once upon a time than you do these days, but there is no better place for an Olympic track and field trial where you've got that European feeling, or small enough stadium that athletes are surrounded by the most knowledgeable track and field fans in America, by far, bar none. Nothing is more exciting, particularly in the old stadium where you could hear the thunderous pounding on the boards, right? Yesterday it was kind of hard for us to make that same noise. Right. We as a big group, 100 of us, are at the 1,500 meter start line. Regardless, just the energy and the clap and the whole thing, the experience. You can see it and hear it in Ryan Krauser's experience last night.
Shot put world record here in
Shot
Eugene
put world
yesterday.
record. And can I tell you, that very specific performance last night was amongst my absolute all-time favorite Olympic trials performances. Might be number 2.
So what's number 1?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. That's not a hard one. In 2016, the decathlon. Ashton Eaton. Unbelievable, right? Under duress, in difficult, inclement weather, PR after PR, to culminate in a world decathlon record.
And very cool. At the end of that, they had, who was Bruce Jenner at the time, and Rayford Johnson, and some of these great decathletes from the past were all there in attendance, and all came out and greeted him and
welcome to the club.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Decathlon World Record Club. Hey man, I get goosebumps just thinking about that.
Yeah, but it was in typical Eugene weather, it rained a lot that week. Yeah. It was less than spectacular weather-wise, and for him to shine like he did in those conditions is something to behold.
And being a Eugene guy, having gone to the University of Oregon, Ryan Krauser last night with his deep Oregon roots. So I had the privilege of speaking to Ryan last night. First thing we talked about was when he released it, he knew it. You could see that he knew it as he let it go, that was it. That was the perfect wave. And sure enough, it was. It was so when we chatted last night, we chatted about that, but he also volunteered that he was so fired up to compete here in Eugene for the first time since the pandemic, and how inspired he was. And if ever there was a place for him to have that experience, that moment like he did, it was last night, and it really resonated with him. It was cool. Yeah, very cool.
And the weather was pretty ideal last night. It was probably in the low to mid 80s and a little bit of a breeze. It was great for competition yesterday. In the past, you've had some folks who, and I've talked to athletes who run in past trials here, and have had some issues with the pollen. And obviously, Galen Rupp wore a mask during warm-ups in the first few laps of the 10K.
Jim Ryan in 1972.
Yeah, absolutely. But still, there's no place like Eugene for a track meet.
I think if given my druthers, if I was the head of the AAU, the USATF, I would put forth a bill that to state that the all Olympic trials into perpetuity be held right here at Tracktown.
And the new stadium is pretty amazing, and now with the inclement weather for collegians, you have the ability to hold a meet under the stadium. Everything is there that you need if you want to hold the track meet under the stadium. Beautiful facility, a lot of new, really great graphics that show the history of the sport, some past Oregon athletes. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, you've got to, if you haven't had the opportunity yet to come visit Tracktown USA and see the new stadium, it's all it was hyped to be and then some. We got to do a grand tour yesterday. We spent a long time walking through all the different nooks and crannies. It's everything it was cracked up to be and then some. Architecturally, it's awesome. Visually, it's awesome. Aesthetically, it's awesome, and functionally, it's outstanding. Just, I mean, look at the results from the NC2A Track and Field Championships, which were here just last week, and look where we're at after just day one of these Olympic trials. Really exciting.
We've seen one world record so far. Do you think we're going to see any other world records happen in this meet?
You know, it's a rarity to have a world record at the Olympic trials, so that makes last night just that much more outstanding. I think we're going to see some very, very, very fine performances. We saw a really nice men's 10,000 meters last night.
And the crowd got pretty loud in that last lap of the 10K last night.
You know, I think the crowd was into it all along. One of the cool things about that 10,000 meters was the number of guys going into it that already had the Olympic Games qualifying standard. There were a few kids who were chasing it, and they went out after it early. But in the end, I think we completed the team that got compiled from that is the exact right grouping of young men, not just for this Olympic Games, but the future and the history of our sport. I see them as being viable candidates for 2024.
Yeah, the top 4 finishers all had the standard for the Olympic Games coming into the race, which was really nice. It didn't have to be the pace didn't have to be forced. It just came down to a tactical affair, and best man won.
Yeah, and really fun sprinting. I actually called the top 3, but not in that order. I didn't have Woody Kincaid to win. I had him to be on the team, but I thought Grant Fisher would win. You?
Same.
Yeah.
I had Grant picked for the win.
And I was desperately hoping for Joe Klecker to make it. And boy, did he run a nice patient race.
Yeah, and great family. Mom was an Olympian. Dad is the former world record holder, 50 kilometers. Great running family, so very cool for him.
Yeah.
And with a new up-and-coming shoe brand called On. They're got a good group training under Dathan Ritzenheim in Boulder right now, and doing some great things with that group. He's got some other athletes competing later this week, and we're looking forward to seeing them.
I would say they got it all going on.
Got it going on.
I got it going on.
Definitely.
Right on.
And so what events are you looking forward to for the rest of this week, mostly?
Yeah, so the women's 1500, I'm an L career.
We'll see the semifinals in that later today.
800s. I mean, both men's and women's 800. Women's 800 is really cool. I think there's 3 high school kids in the women's 800 meters running, under 2 minutes. I mean, that's going to be a smoke. That might be the coolest race. Women's 800 meters, men's 800 meters.
Sophia Goryaran is the youngest competitor in the trials here. I think she's 15 years old still, and she's run like 2:02.9, qualified for the 800, and
Juliet Whitaker, whose dad was a good middle distance runner at Georgetown. Yeah. We're seeing a lot of kids of Olympians. Like we saw the young Hennis in the 5,000 last night, and then she won the 5,000 at the NC2As as her mom had done previously. So we're seeing this next generation of like Olympians or national champions, now children. That's really cool, right?
It really is.
People from my era or your era, their offspring here, factors in the Olympic game and the Olympic trials. It's really exciting. Yeah.
We're looking forward to it. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Always.
And
it's fun.
we look forward to the rest of the Olympic trials, and we'll see you out there.